Hello from us here at Holy Trinity Church in Maisons-Laffitte. Today we'll be considering growing in patience by diving into the Gospel reading for Christ's presentation at the temple. It's found in Luke chapter 2, verses 22 to 40. If you are able to, do take the time to pause the recording here and reread the story of Simeon and Anna's lifelong wait for an amazing event. Well, waiting is not something I love. So when I read about Simeon and Anna, I do wonder how patient they must have been. It says that Simeon had received a promise from God, and yet both he and Anna were well advanced in years. I wonder at what age Simeon had received this promise. And depending on when he received it, I wonder how quickly he expected the answer. If he's like most people, I can imagine he didn't expect to be waiting perhaps his entire life. And so I do wonder whether he and also Anna were always patient, or were there confusing times in their lives when they wondered if God even saw them, remembered them, and was going to do what he promised. Now, not many of us will be given the sort of promise that Simeon received, but we all have things we're waiting for or hoping for, which seem to take much longer than we'd like. In fact, as I say that, you've probably got something springing to your mind for your own life. Maybe something you had to wait for in the past, or things that you're struggling with right now. And you're wondering where that ending point will be. Sometimes it might feel like we spend our whole lives waiting, doesn't it? Kind of on the positive side, we spend a lot of time waiting for life events, things in our studies or professional advancement, perhaps marriage and children. And then, of course, if we do have children, well, there are various life events which become our markers of time. Yet on a more painful side, there's an awful lot of things we wait for that have to do with things that have gone wrong. We're waiting for them to end or stop hurting, things like chronic illness or grief from loss. And then, is it not true? At some level, we all then await our final journey to the end of our own days, which is surely coming to us all. I wonder, have you found waiting easier or harder as you've gotten older? And do you ever wish, like I do, that waiting were easier? I mean, I'm not a naturally patient person. I'm definitely the sort who has prayed, Lord, I'd like to rest in your timing, which in case you're looking for a bit of advice, that would be now that it should be happening, your timing. God isn't often looking for that sort of feedback, is he? I read about Simeon having had a promise from God, and I can't help but wonder, did he kind of look at the political or religious climate around him in the temple and think at various moments, ooh, maybe it's now? Or was he always just saying, Lord, whatever today holds is fine with me? Patience is something God would like to see characterizing our lives. After all, it is a fruit of the Spirit, and therefore, theoretically, it should gradually become manifest in all of our characters. The thing about patience, though, as we all know, is that the good and bad news of it is that it really is a learned manifestation of the Spirit, almost more of a skill before it becomes an attribute. And in many ways, I think it's like learning to ride a bike or drive a car, play a sport, or play an instrument. First, we can kind of picture ourselves doing it, can't we? We imagine, we project what it will be like. And then we start doing it and we're not very good at it. So we have to practice and practice. And sometimes we get it really wrong, like falling off a bike. But over time, for example, an instrument, gradually, day by day, we do get better. In fact, we can become so good at it that we hardly have to think about it. I think patience is like a muscle or a skill. It grows with time and regular training. It doesn't fall from the sky, because here's the main thing, and I'm sure you'll follow this reasoning. In order to know whether or not we have patience, time has to pass without the thing that we're waiting for happening. Annoying, isn't it? We can only know we have patience when we have an unfulfilled desire. Not something that maybe we feel like praying for very often. Then if I pray for it, I might end up waiting for something. But maybe we do pray for patience when we're at church. Have you ever tried this? And then, does that mean that you walk out full of patience? Sometimes, maybe. I don't know. For you, not for me. Usually not. I think very often we come into church like an empty vessel, like an empty plant pot. We may receive in church the equivalent of a little patience seed, something that sows a seed of patience in us, like a verse or a conviction from the Holy Spirit. But, a seed, if I said to you, ooh, I have a beautiful plant in my hand, and yet I only had a seed in my hand, you'd say, not yet, you don't. Because a seed, well, it needs quite a lot in order to be more than bird food. What does a seed need? Well, of course, to grow, a seed needs soil and water and sunshine, and time has to pass. Time has to pass in order for it to grow. And then the plant will result. Well, that's obviously an illustration, a metaphor for cultivating patience in our everyday lives. Let me just share a few thoughts to close us. And I don't say these lightly. In case you think this is a really abstract theme for me, please be reassured. My husband and I spent 13 years living with childlessness that we didn't choose. Sometimes patience is a very deep, soul-rending thing. It's not always about whether or not dinner is ready on time or the bus is late. However, the foundation of having real patience in the face of real things that aren't happening, big things, the foundation is, of course, God. If we didn't have God, well, then I think we would all live lives of unbearable stress and impatience over all the things that we can't control. Because that is the unfortunate essence of everything which requires patience. It's either people or circumstances we can't control. And this dependency, well, it so often creates a tension in us, doesn't it, that can seem unbearable. And yet, it's so important to know that there are things we can do. So what are our choices? Well, I suppose one choice is to shout like a driver stuck in a traffic jam, waving our hands and swearing. Well, we all know how much good that does. So maybe not that. Or we can step back and do a little evaluation of the situation. First of all, is there a spot where I have agency I'm not using? Something I could do that I'm not doing because I was so fixated on one thing, I'm not seeing other possibilities? Or is this situation that I'm really feeling impatient about, is this actually the result of my own actions, poor actions and decisions? And I'm actually blaming others instead of taking responsibility, like a driver who didn't use his GPS or didn't leave an adequate buffer of time. But if we kind of set those aside, because actually maybe we're in a situation in which there really is nothing you can do about it. Well, in that case, let me offer you a quick 3-point model to check yourself against, and they all revolve around God. The first one is God's love, the second is God's character, and the third is God's priorities. How do these help? Well, God's love. If we start to doubt this, then impatience turns to frustration, depression, and despair. Whereas, on the contrary, affirming God's love for us at all times, it's like a warm bath. It reminds us that our hearts are safe in His hands, no matter what happens. The second one is God's character. No matter how much emotional urgency we feel in impatience, it's actually never an excuse to behave badly. Our remit as God's children, even in the most trying times, is to redirect our control urge towards our own character and engage in self-discipline of our words and actions rather than lashing out at others and trying to control them. And then, thirdly, God's priorities. I think it helps to ask myself if there could be a higher, more exalted priority that God is trying to accomplish in a situation than the immediate one I might be upset about. It takes a lot of training and practice for growing, having patience in the big things of life. I think we all know it grows by having patience with the little things. So practicing patience in things like being stuck behind slow drivers or in a slow checkout line, or maybe just being in a slow meeting at work. These are all really good places to strengthen our patience muscles. And thankfully, when we do pray for patience and then practice it, there's also this kind of miracle that happens because the Holy Spirit pours blessing of heart growth into us. Yes, there are aches and pains as we grow, just like any retraining of muscles. But the Holy Spirit multiplies and directs the effectiveness of our efforts so that over time, just like riding a bike, it gets so much easier. May the Lord help us all to grow in patience this week. God bless.